and they don't care about what happens to it anymore. What we want is for everybody on a team, or at least for your peers, to see what you're doing and for you to see what they're doing. Because once we pull something from here in conceptual value into doing, which is value that's being realized, we put a little bit of ourselves into this work. And before, when I couldn't see what was happening afterwards, I would take my work and I would consider it done when I was done with it, not when value had actually been realized. So if we have a longer value stream, which for development, software development might be coding, testing, integration, release, we will watch our user stories walk across the value stream, and we will maintain ownership of those stories longer. And that means we're more likely to do things like say, okay, this user story that I wrote, this code that I wrote is stuck in testing. I'm going to get up and go ask why. Because I know my product. And I want to see that product succeed. So, personal Kanban has 2 rules. You don't even need your whole hand to count them. 2 rules. And those rules are, ready? Visualize your work. Because you can better manage what you can see. Jira is not visualizing your work. Jira is locking your work in a drawer and walking away from it. Okay? Visualize your work so you and everybody else can see. Okay? Then, limit work in process. So the notion of Kanban comes from manufacturing. And what a Kanban is in manufacturing is a big ticket that says a piece of work is about to be done. There's a finite number of those tickets. So the work is limited. And the reason that they're doing that is so that A, there isn't overproduction. And if there's one thing every coder in history has been guilty of, it's overproduction. I tell my developers, you don't get paid for writing code, you get paid for not writing code. Right? We want to write the smallest amount of code possible to achieve the benefit that we want. We always want the minimal amount of product to get the maximum amount of benefit. Because every line of code we write, every product that we produce, we are responsible for it once we release it. Every line of code we write has maintenance attached to it on the other end. So we want to visualize our work and we want to limit our work in process. And we want to do that explicitly. So here in the doing column, we will give ourselves an explicit work in process limit. It's a number. We all know the number. So this looks okay. This doesn't. This is actually hurting you guys to look at this right now. Because this number is greater than that number. So, personal Kanban has 2 rules. Because when we give each other rules, we go through something called reactance. And is that supposed to be on fire? All right. If you're not worried about it, we're not worried about it. Oh, was it a fly? Okay. So reactance is if I give you a rule, you go through two stages with that rule. The first stage is you say, what's the least amount I need to do to conform to Jim's stupid rule? Then, when I leave the room, you say, how can I not even begin to pay attention to Jim's stupid rule? So, all rules we go through reactance, which is you placate it and then you undermine it. So if we have a project that has a lot of different rules, or our processes have a lot of different rules, we'll start to spend more and more and more of our time conforming to the rules and less of our time actually paying attention to our work and producing value. So the reason that personal Kanban has 2 rules is 1, we can fit it on a t-shirt, and 2, because if we gave you lots of rules, while we could certify you in personal Kanban, it would become less and less interesting for you and less easy for you to maintain. So we have 3 tasks that we can be working on at a time. And so we finish something and we move on. We move on to the next task. So what's happening is we're establishing what Lean calls a system of flow. So, and we're doing that by using a tool that Lean calls pull. So flow is a natural, unaided state of something. So ideally, you should just sit there and kind of type in kind of this Zen-like state, and work should just flow to you, and you say, ah, and you type it, and it goes away. But work isn't like that, right? It would be nice if work was like that, but it's not. So we want to use a mechanism to help us achieve flow, or a flow-like state. So what happens now is when something is completed, now we look over here and we say, what is the most important thing for me to be doing next? And then we do this. So, who here is bored at work and needs more to do? You, awesome. Okay, there's always one. So let's say for the rest of you that I asked you to write down everything that you are working on right now, or everything in your backlog. And so you write down all of these things. And you populate your backlog. And you look back at it and you say, oh, that's kind of ugly. It's a big backlog. But if you were telling the truth, what you probably would do is this. Right? Okay. And why are you laughing? It's because it's pretty frickin' true, isn't it? And so the thing is that what's happening here is we're running up against something in our heads called the Zeigarnik effect. And the Zeigarnik effect says 2 things. It says one is that when we finish something, we feel good. We get closure and we move on, right? Okay, that's nice. Okay, but it also tells us that when we don't finish something, we don't get closure and we don't move on. So all of these tasks that I've started, my brain now has to remember all of the states of all of those tasks. This task is for this person, it's this % done, I'm having these issues with it, right now I'm waiting on resources from these guys, I need to collaborate with this person, and this and this and this and this and this. And we only have so much capacity in our heads. So the more tasks we do, the more we're thinking about those tasks constantly, and we're not focusing on what we're working on right now. So we want to limit our work in process to allow us, as the most powerful data processing units on Earth, to deal with these multivariate equations in a way that our brains can actually not flip out on. So why am I standing up here telling you about this right now? Why aren't we doing the 3rd round of Lean Coffee? We're not doing the 3rd round of Lean Coffee because a lot of people were getting up and saying, wow, I've been using my brain all morning. And if I do this in the afternoon, it's going to fall right out. So we see that thinking, even when we're thinking about stuff that we love, uses a lot of calories, it uses a lot of energy, and it leaves us tired. So what we want to do is limit our work in process so that when we bring these things in, we can focus on them. Because guess what happens when you don't focus? you become a little technical debt generation machine. Okay, so in software development, technical debt does not come from the software, it doesn't come from the client, and it doesn't come from the code base, it comes from you, or those you employ, having to finish something before it's really done. So we now have a mechanism for mindfulness at work. So before clutter, our minds are full, but we're not mindful. Now, with simplicity, we have focus, we complete with quality, and we move on to the next task. Does that make sense so far? So one of the things that's happened in software development with Scrum, and this is why Agile is not necessarily lean at the moment, it should be, but it's not, is because we'll start a sprint and we'll take in 10 or 15 user stories, and then we'll start them all on the first day. And then we'll have trouble figuring out why we don't get them all done by the end of the sprint. And the reason is because we're overloading ourselves, we're overloading the team. Because these work in process limits are for the team, they're for individuals, they're for the organization. Okay? So when we work with organizations, we help them set up things that are called strategic intents, which are basically the main goals of the company or the division of the company. And we tell them up front, you only get a few. And based on the size of the organization and a couple other things, we'll set whatever this number is. It could be 1, 2, 3, 5, whatever. But each of those strategic intents, underneath that has a lineup of operational intents, which are like projects. And the operational intents serve the strategic intents. When the coders are working away, or the people on the line are working away, those are tactical intents, right? We want, if we're like a project manager, we have several projects. We want to we want to have our Kanban set up so that we're tracking big elements of the projects. If this is our own personal boards, we want these to be tasks. So the level of granularity that we have on our board is directly proportional to the amount of work that's flowing through it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. And I thrive on questions, so if you have questions, just raise your hand and we'll hit them, because we're about to get really theoretical. Yes? Mm-hmm. 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 Right. So the bad news, okay, so the question was basically how on a personal level can you actually limit your WIP at all, given the planet that we live on. There are two things about that. One is that the bad news is that when everybody leaves here today, you're still gonna be human, right? So every so often, you're going to end up with a day that looks like this. The question is, when this thing comes along that suddenly needs to break your WIP limit, did this break your WIP limit because of political reasons, because of social reasons, because of technical reasons, because of freaking out reasons? So you have a major e-commerce site and your load balancer explodes. You're probably not going to say, I'll get to that after I'm done with this user story, right? Or the one that I like to use is, let's say I work in the cube next to you, and you've got this report to write, and then these two pieces of software to write. And I say, hey, I'm having a heart attack, and I need you to get a defibrillator. And you say, can you wait until I'm done with this report? So life will mess with this, and it will mess with it often. But what I will tell you is that it's easier to know how to deal with something when you're messing with this than when you're messing with this. Okay? So each time you add a post-it note to your doing column, you're adding complexity to your life and you're decreasing your ability to deal with emergencies. So what I would say is that yes, people are going to come to you frequently and mess with your work. So then maybe what you do is you say, my work in process is 2 + 1. It's 2 things I want to do, plus some crap somebody else is going to come in and force me to do. So, and you can change this number to 4 or 11 or what have you, depending on the type of work that you're doing. This number is up to you, but make it a real number. So what we've found is cognitively for individuals, 3 is about the right number. And one of the reasons it's about the right number is because we all lie to ourselves. We all do much more work than we think we're doing at any given point in time. So if we have 3 things on our board, we know that we're doing more than 3 things. But we're tracking these things, and we do them, and we get them done, and when we get them done, we feel pretty good about ourselves. What we also know is that those people who are feeding you work, at some point, if you can explain to them what's going on the board, and they come to you and they say, hey, I've got this extra thing here, can you do this extra thing? You can say, yeah, okay, I've got my backlog. I'm working on these things. Do you want me to stop working on something? Is it an emergency? Or is it something to just get to next? Or is it just a thing? So one of the reasons why those people are giving you work all the time is because they can't see your work and neither can you. So if you can't see your work, and I come to you with this task and I say, can you do this? And you say, no, I'm overworked. My work's hard. Then you're going to be a whiner and you're probably going to get fired. But if you have a piece of paper to intervene on your behalf, I come to you and I say, hey, can you get to this when you're done with those things? Very different conversation. And it's based on one thing and one thing only, that I actually have information to act on. Because most of those people aren't evil. They just don't have the information that they need to know when you are working at your capacity or when you're not. And that's our big problem as knowledge workers, as software developers or doctors or lawyers or engineers, is that since most of our work is invisible until it's completely done, we don't know and nobody else knows what our current workload actually is. So when I was a civil engineer, when I started off being a civil engineer, I had a big tall table with like a T-square and a green top, and then I would like draw lines and people could see what I was working on. A couple of years later, that had all moved to computer-assisted design systems, and then no one could see what I was working on, and then all of a sudden my quality of life went through the floor. So the moral is, computers are awful. Okay. Computers and the internet are awful. Yep. Yep.
I put a task which I hate to do it.
Yep.
But
Yep.
right? Which means that one gets stagnated.
Yep.
Example, I don't want to wash clothes, but I start washing clothes.
Uh-huh.
I go and water the plants.
Yep.
I'm done. I'm picking up something else.
Yep.
But I don't go and wash the clothes, but it's still in WP.
Yep.
WIP. So, is there anything which you can do? One trick which I can think of is that make WIP is one, which means that you do it
Right.
and then you move on to something
Okay.
else. So, is there anything else? Because
Well,
in this particular scenario, I face something.
right. So the good news is that you can only procrastinate on 3 tasks. so maybe you can get away with the laundry, but the moment you put up, wash windows and you don't want to do that either, and then maybe like buy wife Christmas or birthday present and you don't want to do that either, then all of a sudden you're stuck because you can't do any of the things that you put in your whip. But the other thing, of course, is that the longer that stays up there, the longer you feel shame. Yeah, that's a pretty good motivator. I don't have any orange stickies. I used to write all of my accounting tasks on orange stickies because I hated doing accounting tasks and I wanted them to glow in the sunlight. Go, you're not doing your tasks, even if it was in red. I just wanted to say, because you'd end up with this thing where like it'd be a million blue stickies done and then just this block of deadly orange. And so what I did was I set up things that I called orange days, where I would just do all of my accounting in one day. And I had gone through this process where I said, okay, I don't need to hire an accountant because I can do this. I'm smart enough to do it. And it only takes me about a day, and that's not going to cost very much money, but an accountant's going to cost me a lot of money. So I did a whole cost-benefit analysis and worked it all out, and it's like, yeah, I have a good engineering level estimate that I don't need an accountant. But what would happen is like my orange day would be on Wednesday, and then on Tuesday I'd be like, Wednesday's coming. I feel Wednesday coming. And Tony would be like, hi, Jim. And I'm like, Wednesday's coming. And she's like, and she'd run away. And then I get to Wednesday, I'm like, don't talk to me because I'm doing this. And on Thursday, I'm like, you should have seen all that accounting. So when we find so I ended up getting an accountant because I realized that the work took 1 day, but the pain took 3 days. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So there's 2 things about this. One is that if you're running through a whole bunch of stuff here, and this is a whole bunch of happy tasks, and then clothes washing shows up, and you do realize that you just hit the button and then go watch television, right? I mean, it's not that hard. So you get to here, and the clothes washing is here. This seems like it hurts less now because you're actually able to see all the awesome things that you did. So what we're doing here is we're giving ourselves context of our own work. Because if you're not visualizing your work and you can't see your value stream, then your whole life looks like this. You only see the task that's right in front of you, and as soon as it's gone, you see the next task that's right in front of you. And your life becomes this plodding, boring, pointless completion of you don't know what, because when you finished that last project, this is the curse of the nice part of the Zeigarnik effect. You got closure and you moved on, and you forgot what you did. So when I ran a group of civil engineers, we had to do timesheets every 2 weeks. And no one would do their timesheets, and no one would do their timesheets, and then the timesheets would be due, and they knew that the only way they got paid was to do their timesheets, but no one could remember what they did. So they'd be going back, looking in emails, and they'd be calling people up, what did I do on Tuesday? I don't know, man, I'm trying to figure out what I did on Tuesday. Because we forget normal. And we forget normal routinely. So what we don't know, what we don't feel is that when we get to the end of a couple of weeks, that we actually did a lot of really great work. And we don't know. And we don't give ourselves the benefit of the doubt or the credit for that. And maybe over those course of those 2 weeks, we did one thing that just went absolutely horrible, and that's what we define the 2 weeks on. We'll have 20 million happy and then one horrible, and we'll remember the horrible. Yep. Oh, that was just an amen. Yes.
This is all about personal Kanban.
Yep.
And I'm putting a situation in front of you. Suppose I'm an emergency room doctor's hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Emergency room doctor. And I can tackle only one case at a time.
Yes.
An emergency is totally uncertain how many cases can come.
Yes.
And it's all about life and death.
Yep.
So how can I take 3 work at a time?
Okay. So, so to make that broader, because this also works for like technical support. There are a number of careers out there where work comes at you faster than you can do it, basically. And so, in the example of the emergency room doctor, a certain number of patients come in over an hour, and I have to keep track for all of those patients of who they are, what their problem is, what I did to stabilize them, or what the team did to stabilize them, and what needs to be done after that, and how experiments are running beyond that. So lots of people who come in will say things to the emergency room doctor like, "I feel terrible." And the emergency room doctor say, "Oh, I'm going to diagnose you based on that alone." So you have to run tests, you have to do all sorts of things. So this is a visual control. This is one type of millions of kinds of visual controls. So one group that Tony Ann and I worked with years ago was a customer support group. And they were extremely overwhelmed by their backlog of tickets. So there were 24 of them. They had a backlog of 2,000 tickets. Now they were doing 250 tickets a day, but they were also taking in 250 tickets a day. They were very angry people because every day they went to work and they looked at this big backlog, and whenever anything went wrong, it got bigger, but it never got smaller. We helped them get control of their work by doing a few key things. One is there was 24 of them and they were all working as individuals. We put them into teams for work cells. They changed themselves to 3 work cells, which was fine. We gave each of the work cells a personal Kanban, and when things came in, they would route the tickets based on what was going on the Kanban. And we told them, you need to triage your tickets, and you need to invent new roles based on that. And so they invented 2 new roles. One was called a smooth operator, who did tickets that took 5 minutes or less and did triage. They had a ticket slayer that did tickets that would take about 15 or 20 minutes, and then the rest of the team that would do the harder stuff. And then they would rotate people in and out of the fast-paced ones so that nobody would burn out. So they got, because that allowed them to route their tickets better, this is a longer story than this, but I'm skipping things. We said, why not? And they said, because we're processing tickets actually faster than we can write them out. So that's great. That's perfect. I said, my 2 rules are to visualize your work and limit your work in process. It's not to build one of these. It's to visualize your work and limit your work in process. I don't care about this. This is a design pattern. What I do care about are these 2 things. So what we did is we set up 2 big monitors for them that in real time told them all of the data that they needed to see where different types of tickets were bunching up. So your time to first touch is this, wait, it's spiked. And they're like, oh, we've got to fix that. And they got to a point where they weren't clearing more tickets out of the backlog. And I was on the phone with their CIO, and I said, hey, I am noticing in the ticket repository, there's a lot of really old tickets. Can you put up on the screen a ticket aging summary with the oldest 10 tickets in it? And he says, yes. And so he goes, click, 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 click. And then on my screen in Seattle and their screens in West Virginia, these screens pop up. And the people are working away in the support group, and they looked up and they saw that. And like the oldest one was literally 3 years old. It had been in the system for 3 years. And so it was 3 years, blah, 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 down to like maybe 18 months. So really old tickets in the system. And I said to the guy, I said, Jabe, how do you think we can get them to pay attention to these tickets? And he says, I'm not sure. And then one of them disappears. I said, did you see that? And he says, yes. And another one disappears. And so what happened was that group of people, as professionals, when they're working, and they looked up and they were confronted by something that was ugly in their value stream, they had to fix it immediately. They couldn't stand looking at the fact that that was there. So if the visual control that we have, like for the doctor, were a big screen up on the wall, and which they do have, which is, patient X, this condition, currently stable, vitals look like this, currently running these tests, waiting, and then after a while waiting is tests are here, please come back to the nurse's station to get the tests and look over them. That doctor's visual control is managing his or her work in process. It's just doing it using a different mechanism. As knowledge workers, the amount of variation in tasks that we have is so high. We could be, pairing with somebody on something. We could be investigating whether something's technologically feasible. We could be working on third-tier support for somebody else. There's a million things that we could be doing that coming up with a unified, uniform repository of tasks and like some glitzy computer screen is going to undervalue the amount of work that we're doing, and it's going to pretend like we don't have the level of variation that we actually do. Yes, Vibu? Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, definitely. So, so standard work is, as Vibhu suggested, it's work that is that you have standardized, that you have made predictable. And there are elements of software development that we can make predictable. But predictable in software is ridiculously unpredictable in manufacturing. Right, so we are not going to go for a Six Sigma calculation where we're trying to make sure that there's almost no variation in the system. One of the things about software development is that every time we sit down, we are inventing something. Knowledge work, most knowledge work, by its nature is extremely inventive. So what we wouldn't want in the doctor's situation is standard work being, this person came in, they had these symptoms, you do exactly these things, and then you send them home. Because that's how people die. Because the amount of variation in that system is that a certain set of symptoms can actually be indicative of a great many diagnoses. And so what we want to do is we want to run experiments, sounds kind of morbid, but we want to run a bunch of experiments against the patient. Say, okay, we'll do a blood iron test, we'll do an oxygen saturation test, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll give you a CAT scan. And then based on that additional information, we'll begin to piece together what's actually happening, which can be very, very different than what the symptoms actually suggest. So in software development, our goal should be to watch these tickets flow, and then as they flow, we notice things about them. The blue tickets flow once a day. The red tickets take every other day. The yellow tickets are when we're dealing with the crazy product owner from down the street that we hate. And all of those things will have different costs of delay, different surprises, different things that they can teach us. Oh yeah, I actually still haven't talked about those two post-its. And I should probably watch my time. So what's happening here is we're taking a system that was previously invisible to us and unmeasurable, and we're using this as a predictable constraint in our system. And that predictable constraint is saying, now work is flowing, and I can measure the rate of this flow, regardless of how long the doing column is, how many subcolumns it might be. And this is something that's called cycle time. And we start to watch our tasks flow, and we say, pulled the task here, started it here, finished it here. And after a while, we end up with a lot of data points. And by a while, I mean a couple of weeks. In a few weeks, we'll end up with literally hundreds of data points. So those data points, if we plot them out, I finished a bunch of things, and they took a certain amount of time. So what we have here is we have time and time to complete. And now we're able to start to see certain things. Like, we finish almost all of our work in this amount of time or less. Right? In a 2-week period, we get this amount of work done. So I had a group in Australia who showed me something that looked like this. And can anybody guess what those numbers are? No, it's their velocity. So this is sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4, sprint 5. This board up. And they said, we're in big trouble because we can't stabilize our velocity. So I said, yeah, it looks pretty bad. And they said, yeah, can you help us with that? And I said, no. And they said, why not? And I said, well, because velocity is an imaginary number over an arbitrary amount of time. It is a really lousy way to measure your work. The numbers, when Mike Cohn wrote about story points in his original book, he said, this is a number to mess with the heads of your managers. It means nothing. And now we've created an entire industry that is completely obsessed with this number. So these poor people are looking at these numbers here and they're like, we're all over the place. And I'm like, yeah, you are the worst estimators in the history of estimating. And they said, well, what should we have done? I should have said, pick any number. And they said, I don't know, 15. 15, that's what you do every week. You win. And I said, look, you have the most stable delivery system ever. This, and this are statistically insignificant from each other. This is what they were actually, these were the actual, tickets with the actual user stories that they were completing. They were focused on this bogus metric that they were told that they needed to use, and they didn't recognize that they actually had a very, very consistent throughput of about 7 tickets. It didn't matter what tickets they picked. They were always going to get about this much done every week. Because we all suffer from something that psychologists call the planning fallacy. And the planning fallacy, and I'll state this for the record, my full name is James Leroy Benson, AICP, American Institute of Certified Planners. I am a planner more than you could ever imagine, and I have learned that we don't plan very well. So the planning fallacy is governed by something that's called Hofstadter's law, and Hofstadter's law says that human beings will underestimate any complex task even if we're aware of Hofstadter's law. Okay? Yeah, you can't beat it. We're lousy at estimating because what we do is we look at a task and we say, I did that before. It took me 7 hours. So first off, that's ego bias because you're like hell it took you 7 hours. It did not take you 7 hours. But oh yes it did. In my head it took me 7 hours. Then you look at it for a while and you're like, I bet since I did that last time in 7 hours, I could probably do it in 6 hours this time. But it never took you 7 hours to begin with because you were never tracking how long it really took you to complete it. You think it took you 7 hours. So when we're using story points and we're trying to go like between 1 and 3 points, we're actually going through something that's called comparison bias. And so right now you are all suffering from comparison bias. It's painful, isn't it? You're like, this one's higher than that one, and this one's like turned this way, and this one's turned that way, and this one's in his right hand, this left hand, this is on my right side, and this is on his left side. They're the same pens. There are 2 sizes of tasks. There are 2 sizes of features. There are 2 sizes of user stories. Ones you can do, and ones that are ridiculous. Those are the only 2 sizes that we can measure. Because nobody, and by nobody I mean almost nobody, goes back and says, how many tickets did I do versus these? And when I originally estimated these user stories, how many hours did they really take? We never go back and say, oh, that 13-point story ended up being super simple. I did it in an hour. And that 1-point story was like, oh my God, it was terrible. So what we've started doing, because what we found is that we have a group, and the group would all agree this is a 1-point story. Everybody would be totally, 1-point story. Say, okay, now how much does it scare you? Oh, it scares me a lot. It's like, okay, that's not a 1-point story anymore. So what we found out is that risk beats size every time. And so what we do on the tickets is we'll give people stickers, and I am a lousy drawer, okay? I'll just say that up front. So we'll say, poodle, crocodile, or zombie. How much does this ticket scare you? And what we'll do is we'll bring in managers, we'll bring in salespeople, we'll bring in product owners, we'll bring in developers. How much does this thing scare you? And then we'll build a risk profile of the ticket that's based on the professional biases of people in management who are going to be going for business risk, engineers who are going obviously for engineering risk, designers for design risk, marketers for marketing risk. And we find that what we find is that there are some tickets that look incredibly easy that are extremely risky. Because they might be easy to create, but they're probably easy to create in about 700 different ways, and no one knows if they're making the right one. So, again, these tickets, Visual systems. Problem with story points is that they're integers. If you give an integer to any manager, they will try and turn it into time or money. Is this integer time or money? Or is it time divided by money, or money divided by time, or time times money? Because that's what they do. That's why they're there. They're not there to build software. They're there to make sure you have a business to make software for. So don't give them integers. Say, I do 7 tickets a week, and you can actually measure those tickets because now they're visible, they're tangible, they're lovable. Mm-hmm.
They actually produce a lot more throughput, and initially the manager was fighting it because they were just scared of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's being made up as a thing. Other groups do it, it's not as
Mm-hmm.
Can you please repeat that again? This group stopped estimating. Stopped estimating. Almost 2 years ago, and they initially had a lot of resistance from the management. But they have actually produced more throughput, in the sense more production features. When they look back, last 2 years, the organization has decided to now make that a default standard for some other groups too. So there are some teams that have actually stopped estimating in TP. How do they pick up their story? They just pick 4 tickets, 4 cards every sprint. That's all they do. If they finish early, they pull more, but they don't really worry about it anymore. Anything, they also do single piece workflow or 2-piece workflow. They only work at 2 items at a time, and that's sped them up. Overall, that's a data point. That's all I want to know. They release every day now, so they don't have to worry about it.
Sure. Well,
Second, the point she's making that if you don't have estimation, it doesn't in any way directly impair your productivity, because instead of delivering 250 features, you will deliver 225 or maybe 265. But estimation actually slows down the process. So it's like personal experience. Estimation was done in the first few cycles of our Scrum plannings, but it's more or less done away with, in my remembrance, over the last quite a few occasions. So.
In this team, they estimated that they're spending around $6,000 in a day of salary per person. So they calculate the salary, money spent. They said, no, that's a lot of waste of money. Let's use it somewhere else. They say
it's not estimation. It is the ability to schedule. Okay, and so there's 2 things about scheduling. The bigger the batch, the higher the risk. So that was the original goal of time boxing, was to lower the risk in any release by making sure that we'd only been doing it for 2 weeks, and the worst thing that could happen is we lose 2 weeks worth of work. So let's say that you have a team where you've been able to predictably measure their throughput. Every week you're getting 7 tickets done, and you have a project that has 49 tickets in it, you know it's going to take 7 weeks. Now, what you also probably want to do is recognize that for every 5 or 6 tickets that you put in, you're probably going to want to change 2 or 3 of them. So when you estimate your tasks up front, you're assuming that those tasks are going to stick around for the whole release, and a lot of them don't. They either are altered or they're just tossed out and replaced by other ones. Or worse yet, they should be, but nobody has the guts to do it because they're afraid to take out the no-value tasks and replace them with high-value tasks. And so one of the things that we want to do with a visual system or a system based on flow is we don't care necessarily what is populating this backlog as long as we can see it coming. And if you put all of these tickets in here and then later on say, oh, you know what, I think I'd like to replace this ticket with this one, the only thing that we should have to do as contributors is say, is this a valid ticket? Can we do this? So we can say, you know, Make me a sandwich can be a ticket. Hand me my shoes can be a ticket. Build the space shuttle could be a ticket. And build the space shuttle is obviously much bigger than the other tickets, and we know that. We can tell that. It doesn't matter if make a sandwich is harder than get me my shoes. So we just want to make sure that whatever we replace in here, that we're replacing it with something that is reasonable. The other thing is that work is generally being done in an overloaded system. So you figure that your whole system has those cascading, funny-looking tickets going off the bottom of the board. When that happens, the whole system slows down, defects go up, rework goes up, the system slows down more, which causes more rework, which causes more defects, which causes more frustration, blah, 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 blah. So when you start to limit your work in process and you can focus and complete things with higher quality, defects and rework go down and throughput shoots through the roof. And it's simply because we're using our CPUs in our heads more effectively. We're not overclocking all the time. Yes?
Are you accounting for work which is coming through workplace work or personal work also?
Okay, so the question is, are you including personal work in the personal Kanban? So the answer to that is different for everybody. And the reason is because we all have different comfort levels for how much of our personal lives we'd like to share with other people.
If it's personal Kanban, I'm presuming that you're keeping this personal. There's a personal Kanban I'm maintaining.
No, so the personal and personal Kanban means items of value to the individuals doing the work. It doesn't necessarily mean personal, like to me personally. And yes, we'd probably rename it if we could, but it's been 7 years now, so we're kind of stuck with it. Gotcha. So, wow. Okay, so I've been given 5 minutes, and I have to figure out what I want to say for the last 5 minutes. The good news is, like everything we've talked about today is totally going to guide what's in my keynote tomorrow. So this has been wonderful. But if I had 5 minutes to close up, what I would say is this. I'm going to go back to the key points, is that we can better manage what we can see, and we can do more, we can only do as much work as we have capacity for. So we can't do more work than we're capable of. And if we can share our workload with our peers, and tomorrow morning I'll tell a story about shared stories and how shared stories help distributed teams work better. That's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. We want to show ourselves and the people that we work with the story of what we're doing. You know, what's supposed to be happening, what's actually happening, what would we like to happen, what is our real rate of completion, what's slowing us down, where are our communication gaps happening, where are defects entered into our systems. All of these can be visualized on our visual controls and fairly easily, actually. Was there one more question? Okay. All right, is there another question? Yes? Yep.
But the software thing, we have some issues, we have blockers, there are interdependencies. So over a period of time, the cards in that case are also growing.
Right.
So we are fine. So ultimately what we have to do is keep them and as well, because we cannot be seeing the board all the time. We cannot put a large television everywhere and what we do. Any ideas to do that?
So okay, so the question was basically, we're using a Kanban to measure our work, or to manage our work, but the doing column gets bogged down by blocked tasks and other issues that are slowing work down. So are there predictable elements in what creates a blocker?
Yes, in some.
Okay. So,
I fixed the issue and I was doing it. I sent it to the customer and I need to probably wait for a day. I do not want to again create a task for me in very, okay, when
No.
the customer turns. So,
okay.
I do not want to create really too many cards for myself, which become a headache for me itself to manage them.
Right.
So ultimately, for such reasons, my doing tasks are, getting more.
Right. So if some, that's another column in the value stream. So we treat a lot of things like blockers that are actually the way that work actually happens. And so when a block task shows up, and it's like this task is blocked and it's not moving, the first thing that you should do is pick up the task and say, hey, task, why are you blocked? And do you have friends that will become blocked in much the same way? And the moment that you see a pattern where there is a certain type of blockage, make that an actual step in the value stream and measure how long something dwells there. Because this ticket itself has a cost of delay. And that cost of delay is often rather substantial. And so if you can start to say, every time we go off for user acceptance testing with this one particular client, we wait 6 months. And that 6 months is actually costing the company, $647 million. And then you can say, oh, well, $647 million, it seems like a lot of money. Maybe we could find a different way to work this out. So when you find an unnecessary or unreasonable constraint in your system, you want to highlight that constraint and make it your most important priority. Why is that unwanted constraint there? What are the costs of delay that constraint is incurring? And how can we work to clear that up? Yep. Uh-huh. Blocked as a column, I would not recommend. So yes, some teams do have blocked as a column, and blocked as a column makes as much sense as having another column saying, I was bored with this and didn't want to work on it anymore. So a blocked task is going to be something that you need to unblock. And the longer that it's sitting here and pushing against this whip limit, the more likely you are to unblock it. Because what's going to happen otherwise is you're going to get to the end of your project or the end of your sprint or the end of your milestone, and you're going to have a big pile of blocked tasks, which means you're going to do all the easy stuff, and then in the last week you're going to try and do all the hard stuff. And then you're going to get Windows 8. Right? Yes?
But Jim, we had a blocked/waiting column, waiting swim lane. And then why we did that was that it gave us a clear indication of what are the ones which we are actively working on, what are the ones which are stuck up, waiting for approvals or whatever it is. Just we wanted to separate both.
Right. So let me show you what that looks like in your head. So you got your 3 that you're working on, and you have this one that's blocked, and you have these ones that are blocked. So you might build a board where that looks pretty, but in your head it looks like this. So what's happening is these things, each of these tasks now requires care, feeding, and management. And the more of these there are, the more it slows down your overall throughput. So if these are blocked for a reason, like they're out for UAT, which isn't really blocked, it's because they're actually doing something, that's fine. If these are blocked because you couldn't figure out how to build it, then I really want to know that. Because if you're sitting there and you say that you've gone through a bunch of things and you have a ton of things that you can't figure out how to build, that means that there needs to be some more steps in our value stream, like the figure out how to build this step, which is a step we often skip, right? So this is one of the, in the group that we had, the Agile Kills Innovation group. The premise of the ticket was that the business was trying to shove business value out every 2 weeks as opposed to good software, and that there was actually a difference, and that there was no room for discovery about how to develop the software correctly, what options you had about developing certain features, and so forth. So we need to be honest about the steps we really take to build our product, regardless of what that product is. And we can't say, well, ideally it would just be you give me stuff and everybody's happy.
And we need to acknowledge,
Yep.
that
What? Oh,
work doesn't necessarily flow linearly. So the design pattern that Jim is using right now suggests that it does, but in some cases there will be a certain amount of churn between the different lanes. In the follow-up email, I'll make sure that we include a link to some design patterns that we have that will address a lot of the questions that some of you were asking.
yep. Okay, so I think that that is all the time we have for this. And are we headed for tea now? Wow, all right. So, so tea and biscuits. And after that's done, then we will do the last round of lean coffee for the day.
So there is tea and coffee out there, and we should start in 15 minutes. If you keep it. There is a